Good evening, and thank you for having me here. I'm happy to be here to share with you some of the key findings from your most recent community survey. So let's dive in. There we go. Great. So we've been working with your community for a few years now, and we've got a really good solution for maximizing community participation in an effort like this. And in broad strokes, what we did was randomly sample households to participate. We randomly sampled about 1,500 of the 13,600 households, and we received responses back from over 500 of them for a response rate of about 36%, which is really great, especially in this day and age. In addition to that, the city also ran a parallel version of the survey that was open to any Upper Arlington resident who wanted to participate. And we saw over 600 responses to that. So there's a fair amount of community voices that were collected as part of this process, which is really something to be proud of. The map that you see up on the screen there is a map of the participants, the 529 who are randomly sampled from the population. I keep saying that phrase randomly sampled because that's important. Because we randomly sampled from the population, we're able to generalize our responses back to the larger population. And that's something that's important because we want to be able to know with accuracy what are people thinking and feeling about the topics at hand. There are a few high points that I want to point out to you. I'm going to talk about those briefly, and then we're going to dive into some more of the specifics here in just a few moments. Overall, residents of Upper Arlington do feel like this is a great place to live. Nearly all the survey respondents said that UA is an excellent or a good place to live, an excellent or good place to raise children. The majority of residents rate the quality of most municipal services provided by the city as excellent or good. And the overall quality rating for the city's municipal services is at the highest recorded level that we've seen since we've had the privilege of working with you over the years. And a majority of residents say that they're highly likely to remain in Upper Arlington in the near future. Most residents trust their city officials. We measured trust in a number of different ways. Some of those ways are called out here in the slide here, but there's more in the report. Most Upper Arlington residents think city government officials are trying to do the right thing most of the time. They trust government officials a fair amount or a lot, and or believe city government officials welcome citizen input a lot or a fair amount. These are all majorities. And then lastly, there's a strong sense of belonging among the residents here in the city, but also a desire for increased diversity. So although most residents strongly feel that they belong in UA, about 2/3 of them said that they do, about a third do not. About a third also think that it can be relatively difficult for new residents to be accepted as part of the Upper Arlington community. And slightly more than half of the residents surveyed said that it's very or extremely important to them that the city attracts residents of different races, ethnic groups, and nationalities. And that came through actually in a couple of different ways that I'll share with you in just a few moments. So those are the three big takeaways that we see as we're looking over these data and thinking about what to share out with you. I'm going to go into some more detail here as we move on. In terms of quality life and some of the municipal service ratings, in 2022, 98%, nearly everyone said that Upper Arlington was an excellent or good place to live, which is similar to what was observed back in 2017 in terms of those top two box answers. Nearly 3/4 of Upper Arlington residents plan to stay in the city in the next 5 years. The blue parts of the bars here are those who are saying extremely likely or very likely. That's how we get to that nearly 3/4 percentage. But those who are less likely to say that are those who report having a racial or ethnic background that's not white only, or those who are renting here in the city. In terms of their confidence in the ability to find and afford housing in the city, we know that that's something that's probably important to residents as they think about their overall quality of life. So we had a specific question focused on that. Here you can see that only about a fifth of residents say that they're very or extremely confident that they could find and afford housing in the city if they had to move. The majority, 55%, are saying not confident at all or only slightly confident that they can do so, kind of reflecting some of the comments that came up during the conversation earlier here tonight. Early in the questionnaire, we asked two open-ended questions of the participants. An open-ended question is one that we're not providing any response options to them to select from, and instead they can write or share whatever option that they wish, and then we can go back and code or categorize their responses according to a regimen or a rubric that we have. Those two questions are shown on the screen. What do you like the most about living in Upper Arlington? And what do you think is the most important problem facing Upper Arlington? I'm going to show you the top 4 or 5 responses to each of those questions right now. In terms of what they like the most about living in Upper Arlington, the top 4 relate to a feeling of safety or security, its location or proximity to Columbus, good schools, the quality of the schools, and a sense of community pride or spirit. And that top one is asterisked because there's been a substantial increase in that response from 2017. I think back in 2017 it was about 36% saying that. Now we're up to 44%. So more citizens, more residents are feeling safe and secure living in UA. Turning to the other side, what do you think is the most important problem facing Upper Arlington? The top 4 read out as follows. A lack of diversity, 26%. Back in 2017, I believe the proportion there is maybe 3% saying that. High taxes, 16%. That's very similar to what we observed back in 2017. And then the last 2 relate to some of the topics that we heard about during this evening's council discussion. Concerns about managing growth, 14% people expressing a concern about that. And concerns about some developments that are occurring, whether they be commercial, multi-use, or multifamily ones that are occurring throughout the city. That maybe that's too much, or maybe it doesn't reflect the character of the city. And those 3 of those 4 are also asterisked because we did not see those nearly at the rate that we're seeing them now. I believe we're talking maybe proportions of 3% or 1% back in 2017. So this is something that more and more residents are expressing their viewpoints on. And of course, as Steve mentioned, one of the central purposes of this effort is to understand resident perceptions of the quality of city services that are provided to them, to track for changes over time, to find opportunities for improvement. One thing that we noticed this year compared to last is that residents' overall quality rating for the services provided by the city increased from 89% saying it's excellent or good back in 2017 to 93% in 2022. That's a substantial jump. The city's public safety services were also rated highly, as were the city's parks and recreation programming classes. And then I have to call this out, even though it's not the most interesting topic to some people. There was definitely a statistically significant pattern observed from 2017 to 2022 regarding the city's garbage collection, recycling collection, and yard waste collection services. If you compare on the left-hand side of this graph, that's the proportion saying that those services are excellent or good back in 2017 to 2022. The same proportions, excellent or good. And the survey that was completed in 2017 was before the pay-as-you-throw program that you had was removed, was replaced. That had been something that had been observed by the city for some time. Before 2017, a policy change was made. Citizens love it. This is your proof that citizens appreciate some of the hard work that you do in the conversations that you have. And so I think that's worth calling out as part of this process. There's a fair amount of conventional wisdom these days that trust in institutions, trust in elected officials is on the wane, is on a decline. That certainly may be the case at the federal level, sometimes the case at the state level. Is that also the case at the local? And the answer is so far appears to be not so much. A large majority of survey respondents think that Upper Arlington's government officials try to do the right thing most of the time, 89%. It's very similar to what we saw back in 2017. When we ask residents, well, how much do you trust Upper Arlington's government officials, and provide them with a number of different options? The majority say that they trust them a fair amount or a lot, which is again similar to 2017. So the top bar going across has the most recent survey data from this. The bar at the bottom, 2017, is the last time that we had the privilege of working with you about this. Those patterns are very similar. We also had some other questions included in the survey that tap this notion of trust in a couple of different ways. This one that you're seeing right here relates to the idea of to what extent do local government officials welcome or invite citizen input, from not at all to a lot. And here we actually see a positive pattern compared over time. If you notice the difference here in these two bars, the proportion or the size of the segments that are black or gray have become smaller in 22 compared to 2017. Back in 2017, nearly 40%, 39% said input was welcomed a little or not at all. In 2022, that's down to 30%, which is an encouraging sign for citizens' perceptions of the openness of Upper Arlington's government officials. And Please. Can do. Two. Welcome. We also did include a question in here that asked people to evaluate how I guess, the quality of their experience or interactions with city employees. We learned, or we asked overall, have you had any interactions with city employees, whether it be in person, by phone, by email, some other way in the past 12 months? About half said yes, they did. And then of those who did, a majority of those, 78%, said that they were very or extremely satisfied with that interaction, which is encouraging in terms of how they feel they are being treated in these daily, day-to-day type interactions with city staff. I want to move into this topic here, opinions about belonging and diversity in Upper Arlington. This has been a topic that's been attracted a lot of attention over the past few years. And so the 2022 survey questionnaire included a number of new questions that were focused on this idea of belonging, or the extent to which Upper Arlington is perceived by residents to be an accepting community. We asked the participants in the survey to evaluate how well this statement reflected their own personal opinion. I feel like I belong in Upper Arlington. And you can see here that nearly 3/4 say, or I guess just over 2/3, say that that statement describes them very well or extremely well, which is great. But a third say it doesn't, saying that it only describes it not well, slightly well, or only moderately well. And when you take a look at the differences here by certain subgroups or elements of the population, there are some patterns that emerge. Those that have a racial or ethnic background that's not white only are less likely to say, I feel like I belong here in Upper Arlington. Those who are younger are a little bit less likely to say, I feel like I belong. Those who are renting, same story. And those who have been here for less than 30 years are more likely to say this as well. Most residents do think that it's relatively easy for new residents to be accepted into the community, which is a good sign of, again, about 2/3. But then there's almost a solid third of residents saying that this process, being accepted into the community, can be relatively difficult for them. And then lastly, one of the last slides I'm going to leave you with here tonight, about half the residents said that it's very or extremely important to them that Upper Arlington attracts residents of different races, ethnic groups, and nationalities. Again, those are the blue segment of the bars here. So they were the majority on that topic or on that point. Just to recap real quickly, the top 3 findings I wanted to make sure that I left with the group here today. Residents do feel that Upper Arlington is a great place to live. Most of the residents are trusting their city officials, and that there is a strong sense of belonging, but also desire for increased diversity among the community. And so at this time, I'd like to welcome any questions you might have or any conversation you might wish to have.
Or we go back a couple of slides just from where you were to that sort of the last couple of points you made. These are hard for me, and in your experience, is Upper Arlington unique with their answers here? Or is this what you see in all cities everywhere? Does that question make sense? And it's not me trying to excuse anything away. I'm just curious if there's a certain segment of the population in every community that just doesn't feel like they fit in. Is that the case?
Right. I'm not aware of many other municipalities asking these questions.
Okay.
So this question right here, I feel like I belong in Upper Arlington. That's one that we created, looking to the literature to see if there's any kind of pre-validated questions on this topic. We did not find any easily on that point. And so this is one that we created for you to measure this. And so I don't have a good answer to that because I don't know how many other municipalities, not just in Central Ohio, but more broadly, are actively surveying and talking about that and making that public.
Now, maybe an unfair question for you, but I'm sort of viewing you as the expert on this. Did that strike you as high? How does that hit, as the person that sees this kind of data in all kinds of settings? I'm just curious about it.
Right. I think that this is a sensible pattern to me here. It would make sense that, considering what I know of the city, having had the privilege again of working with you for so many years, I do know that there is a strong sense of belonging. I do know that there's a strong sense of community from that earlier open-ended question about what are some of its strengths, this feeling that there's a sense of community pride or spirit. We know that it's there. So to me, this is internally consistent with those other data points. But then when you look at some of the differences that are observed within this group of 529 residents who participated, you see some very telling stories and sensible ones from my mind in terms of the differences that emerged when you look at this by race or ethnicity or by age or by renting or owning or even just tenure, how long you've been in the city. The way that the data break apart based on those subgroups makes sense to me. And so while I'm not able to compare this to other cities or municipalities, the patterns here make sense to me.
Thanks. Yeah, that's interesting.
Follow-up question on that, just because you mentioned 529. How did you use the additional 600 some voluntary, non-statistically valid, yada, yada? How did you use that? Do you use those to stress test, as Councilmember Lynch likes to say, your 529 that are statistically valid? Or how do you use that extra data? I guess I would ask.
Right. So what we did was, if you're able and interested in looking at the report, the appendix has a review of that. We looked at the results of those 610 residents and compared those percentages in the report against our 529. And we found that there was a fair amount of similarity between the two. And whenever there was a difference in the percentages by more than 10 percentage points, we call that out. So basically, yes, you could think of it as a stress test and sorts. It's not a random sample. You can't generalize those 610 responses back to the broader population, but there's direction there that people are trying to express. There's direction there that we can interpret and use. And to me, I do see that as a reinforcing statistic or group of statistics for what we have to say. What we heard them say.
I don't think that appendix was in what we sent to you. We'll get it to you though.
It's
Oh,
in
is it?
it's what Crystal attached as
Okay.
an exhibit. Or I'm
Oh,
sorry,
was it?
as
Okay,
a
sorry.
PDF to.
But
I was
overall-
curious because I looked at those 600 some as either having an issue they want to reach out and voice to us.
Right.
Or they're bored. I don't know.
Right. And so I think it was important for the city and for our firm. We heard that kind of great response back from the community to this completely. I mean, all of this is optional, right? But they weren't part of this random sample that was going to be used to help guide our these evaluations of city services. But they took the time out of their schedule to share their feedback with us. And so we want to make sure that we honor that we consider those results. We found those results to be highly similar, except for about 8 or so cases, and those were called out.
I'm sorry. So the ones that are in the appendix are ones that are significantly different.
Yeah,
Okay.
we didn't conduct a statistical significance test on that, but considering the percentages are greater than 10 percentage points, they're probably there.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Just more for clarity for me. So I can assume that none of the 600 overlaps with the 529. They're completely, or is there a possibility that,
There's a possibility of
Okay.
that, right? So we had good control, if you will, in terms of we know the households that we're inviting to participate, whether they're of a single family home or an apartment. And we were able to engage them multiple times with multiple mailings. But we don't know which apartments at all, right? Again, which is why we focus most of our effort in reporting the 529.
Right. Got it. Thank you.
Any other council questions? Mr. Cooley.
Thank you for your presentation. There's a interesting statistic you have on page 21 that there seems to be a dividing line in the community at Fishinger Road, that the residents north of Fishinger Road, 76% say they have a fair amount or a lot of trust in the city government, and below Fishinger, it ranges from 52 to 53%. Do you have any other insights to share as to why there's that disparity?
Not from the survey data here, no. So I just pulled that up on this slide here to reference the statistic that you're talking about. It would all be conjecture on my part. And so no, we didn't have the real estate, if you will, within the survey question to ask open-ended follow-ups to each of these questions. Although it would have been great, that survey would have taken far too long for residents to complete.
Ms. Burris.
Thank you, Council President King. I think I just want to make a note for staff that I found this to be a very valuable exercise for us as a city. So although I don't necessarily have any specific comments to the findings, which I found extremely helpful and really enjoyed going through, Especially on issues concerning trust and communication, I thought it was such an excellent way for us to benchmark how we're doing. Um, Perhaps, if there's any for open-ended comments, things that were popping up at you, I'd be really curious about, what your sense was on how our residents were feeling about the accessibility of staff and their elected officials.
Right. Sure. Happy to talk briefly about that. Um, we noticed in the open-ended responses about some of the biggest problems facing the city of Upper Arlington. I think 3%, 4% said that city government policies were too liberal. And then 2% said that city government policies were too conservative. So there's a lot of back and forth, even within the chatter, within the survey, if you will, in terms of the extent to which they trust the city government. One thing that I thought was interesting here is that the proportion of people saying a general idea around the city just can't be trusted, or I don't trust its leaders, that dropped by half. It was 7% people saying that was the most important problem in 2017, down to 3% in this most recent version of it. So to me, it seemed that kind of like small change seems to pop out. It's directionally similar to what we're seeing here with this question that you're seeing on the screen.
Yeah, and I guess I would just encourage our staff to continue on that path. And I know we've certainly done our part by having meetings where we do extra hearings. I really appreciate Council Member Lynch's, Facebook updates where he shares with our residents things that we're doing. That to me there was a lot I took back from this, particularly on the issues of diversity and fostering a sense of inclusion, which was why the CRC exists. But I felt perhaps most proud about the items involving trust and communication.
So I do have, before, to finish this up, I do want to make a couple comments about where we go, but I don't want to do that before you guys have finished answering questions or asking questions.
I do have one additional question, and this has been great. I appreciate taking the, I guess, foresight to put in this new question on sense of belonging in a community. Now, is this something, and maybe it's, for you, Steve, how do we, if this creates kind of a benchmark, and we have the CRC in place, how does this, say 5 years from, very much like how we have 217 to kind of do that comparative back and forth, how are we ensuring in the future kind of keeping this question set for our community? And do we find value in that feedback loop for the CRC?
So, great questions. I do think, we've done a little bit of a debrief on the survey. I think we're going to go through it a couple more times and then do a little bit deeper dive or do another debrief. I think we could have simplified those questions a little bit, but I think all in all, I like where those questions went. I think the question on affordability, and I don't know that we could have separated that out. It's availability and affordability in the same question. And I think that, I think if we had it to do over again, I might have tried to find a way to tease out those two things separately because they're the policy implications of those two things are very, very different. They're related, but there's some differences there. As it relates to the sense of belonging questions, yeah, I think it's something that as we look at kind of the quality of the experience for our residents, it not only can guide us, but I think one of the things, and this will kind of help me transition into talking about what comes next. I don't want this to just be data that we use for the city operation. I think there's a lot in here that I plan to be, and Emma and I plan to be, and we actually talked with the Network UA group today about this report and really using this data to help guide our community organizations in terms of what problems they can be working on in our community and what it is that members of our community want. So we talked to them today. I'm on the agenda for UA Rotary on the 29th of November, it looks like. if my email from Milt is accurate, to get out there and talk to the community groups about, hey, here's what we're hearing from members of the community, and really saying that some of these issues, the issues that are most important to our community now, some of them aren't primarily a nexus to the city. And there's a big nexus to community groups, and how do we come alongside those community groups and help them address some of these issues?
I have a question to piggyback on that. We did the focus groups study as well, and I don't believe we've had a report out on that. What are next steps for that, and how does that connect to this?
Yeah, and thank you for bringing that up. That's another, I think, bringing that, so that's the focus groups that we did with Mo Wright's group, and really looking at issues around that get to some of the sense of belonging. So I think we want to tease that out a little bit more with the CRC, but I've been remiss in doing that, and kind of bringing that up, but we do want to get that report from Rayma Consulting to you guys and kind of combine it with this. We actually coordinated those two studies together. We used some of the information from what Rayma did to help inform these questions. So the two things do go together, and hopefully, I think there's some solution sets, or not solution sets, ideas to work on. Solution sets is too strong. Some ideas to work on out of that Rayma report.
Right, I thought there were some sort of action items, so that
Yep.
the idea for this is also to have similar action items. Or how does that?
We didn't ask for action items out of this. Really is a data collection exercise. And now it's upon us and members of the community to take this and talk about what the kind of programmatic ideas out of this are.
Or a question, are the open-ended questions at the end of the survey or at the beginning of the survey?
At the beginning.
Okay. So I think we talked about this before, but just in terms of, I don't know what statistic word you would use to say, leading somebody to an answer in an open-ended question when there's a multiple choice question, two prior that resonates with the person more so than something else. So if I was looking for a house and I couldn't find something, affordability would probably be my open-ended answer. And you're saying those open-ended questions precede those multiple
much so.
choice questions to remove any kind of is taint a statistically
Bias.
valid word? I don't even know what.
Yep.
Bias. there we
Bias,
go.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of literature on that
Tech stats.
topic. And so we adhere to that literature, and I think those were questions 3 and 4 of this 50 or so question survey.
That's really honestly why I was blown away about the movement on a couple of those things, is because it was question 4 and it was completely open-ended. So the one other thing that I did want to point out.
Steve, can I follow up on that real quick?
Oh, yeah,
Just
sorry.
one more. Did we have, because I think what's almost more interesting than the statistics is kind of the cross section of the statistics when you apply rental to the answer to the question or racial diversity to the question. In terms of the open-ended questions, did you see any statistically notable trends in terms of answers coming from certain subgroups, whether it be geographical or?
Yeah, it's a
yeah.
great question. I'd have to go back and look. Oh, one thing, it's going to be hard to pick up an effect like that when we're talking about 26% of the, so say right here in this example, 26% of the 529 said that lack of diversity was the most important problem. And now to try and break that down into owners versus renters or by age across 5 different categories or so on, you become less able, it's almost like a dim flashlight in the dark. The flashlight has become dimmer as our sample size becomes lower.
Gotcha.
So I don't think we've checked on that for those. I may have checked on that on the feeling of safety and security, since that's nearly half of the sample saying that,
Sure.
but I don't have that right in front of me right now, but I'm happy to share that
I
back
was
with.
just interested to
Yeah.
try to understand something, because again, that's the most interesting part of, I mean, it's great, all the other stuff. To tell us we're doing great, we're the ones paying you, I get that. But some of the other stuff, they kind of take some of that out and you're actually kind of being able to see
Yeah.
really who's answering and why, and to try to get to your solvable solutions, I think was the word you used. But thank you.